Hi, it's Susan from Worldpeacefull. I was going to go for a walk, but I'm feeling to continue with Susan Lindauer. I don't think I'll ever be able to say her name. Lindauer. I'll call her Lindauer. She's the one that's written the book Extreme Prejudice, her experience as a CIA asset, and her shock at her own government's awareness of the events of 9/11 before they happened, the planes, the World Trade Center bombing, Libya, Lockerbie issue. Her father was a journalist. She's been to the London School of Economics. She's an economist herself. She's also a graduate in respect to political science. She's very educated. She worked for the Seattle Post as in the intelligence area. It's called the Seattle Post Intelligencer. The Herald, the Everett Herald. She's an editor and writer. US News and World Report. She was a reporter and researcher. She's worked for a couple of representatives. They look like Democratic representatives to me, because she was left-wing, wasn't she? Yeah, I'd say they're Democrats. She was a CIA covert asset in respect of the Libyan UN mission. Senator Carol Moseley Braun, she was working for her at some point, and she was a CIA covert asset, press secretary. Iraq UN mission, US liaison, New York. She was a CIA covert asset. She worked for a Republican representative, I'd say, Zoe Zofgren, who's a Democrat. CIA. So she's got a democratic basis. So I could see them saying that this is a political thing, political issue in respect of George W. Bush. But it's hard to say, but I don't know. When I've listened to her speak, she certainly sounds genuine to me. But as with everything, you're very wise to bounce everything off your own sense of what's true, what's not, and do research yourself. I'm just working off things that I think are very important. So she's written the book Extreme Prejudice. She's a whistleblower. And this paper that I'm going to read excerpts out of is about her exposing everything. It's a transcript by her. September 23, 2011 was when it was produced. So we're talking 8 years ago. This is nothing new. However, I don't think many people know about her. So I'm going to sort of just scan down this because it is a big document, and I'm just going to try and pick up information as I go that feels I need to talk to it. So she talks about the 9/11 Truth Alliance is one of the few groups that refuses to stop speaking out. Good. And to stop thinking. So they're going to keep thinking, keep speaking. Speaking out's extremely important, but make sure when you do speak out, you've got your facts straight, that you can prove what you're saying, because you don't also want to harm another person's reputation, even though, yes, they do come out and they cry defamation. I think that there has to be a basic respect too, of not just bringing people's names up despite the legal side of it, just out of pure respect for people. I'm a problem solver myself, and I'm not really into the aggressive approach because I would never want to hurt another person. However, I do think those people who are engaged in criminal activities, their activities have to be brought to light in the public interest, because they put those of us who are very honest in a position because you don't want to see harm happening to somebody else. And to do nothing gives a form of tacit consent, sends the wrong message. It's also a duty of care to help really how it's sort of coined the tyrant. This is something I read some time ago from an enlightened source that said it's actually out of love of the tyrant that you speak up to the tyrant. You have to stop tyranny, because if you don't, it actually hurts them as well. So the duty of care goes much further than just revealing a truth and stopping a behaviour. It's actually in service to that one who's doing it. The people who are appeasing the ones that they know are creating criminal activities, those who are supporting them, those who are hiding the evidence, those who are buying off judges, etc., etc., you are not serving that person who you're protecting. You're certainly not serving the community. And there is always a consequence. This is through natural law I'm talking about, not just legal processes. I'm talking about there is a natural rebalancing in nature, even in respect of things like this. Eventually, tyrants fall. As Gandhi said, he said they always fall. So bear that in mind. It will come down, the system. But we do not want it, I'm just feeling inspiration around this, we do not want it replaced by other tyrants who are sitting in behind, hoping it all falls. I would highly recommend we strengthen democracy. It's not the best system, but it's a system for the moment that it's been very badly tarnished, I might add, by those who have promoted it. But the people themselves have to actually live out democratic principles they say they believe in. I'm doing that. Freedom of speech is a democratic foundation. If I was to allow intimidation by others to silence me because I was frightened of jail or frightened of being hurt, then I wouldn't be living in a democracy. I would be living in a tyranny. And you can choose it just by virtue of your thought. I choose democracy. And I will always choose it because I like freedom. It's fun. Anyway, no one can really take your freedom anyway. We all have the freedom to choose, and even when we think we don't. So this 9/11 Truth Alliance is really about speaking out and they're not going to stop thinking. And so by coming to this forum that she did, she said, you're part of a tradition of enlightenment and resistance and truth-seeking. I always sort of hesitate on the word resistance now because I don't think you need to resist anything. I think it's a question of allowance. But allowance is not appeasement, and allowance is not giving tacit consent. It's going with the flow and knowing that natural justice will happen and just speaking up as you see it. Speak the truth. That's it. So I'm going to read through this now and try and pick out choice cuts. So this alliance, the Enlightenment, truth-seeking, has been a hallmark of higher cultures of the planet. What she's saying is that she doesn't see truth and enlightenment being lived out at this time. She says it's been stamped out with the likes of Guantanamo Bay. People might remember that was the torture centre set up in Cuba, which I don't believe the Cubans were for, and any other torture chamber you care to name. So she's setting up meetings with the 9/11 Truth Alliance meetup. They go to True Brew Coffee House. I just wonder how many other undercover people are there, but I guess she would know who they are. She said they were coming up to the 10th anniversary. This was 2011. So we're now 2019, so it's 8 years later. So we're talking a 19-year anniversary now. So what she's saying is it's an anniversary that's looking at the war and torture, ripping up the Constitution, crashing the economy. These are pretty strong words, but that's what she's saying. And here we are. We're about to be treated to a media bloodbath in which they're going to rev it all up again, and maybe this time for Iran. Now, this was said in 2011. Well, what's happening today in 2019 around Iran? I also had inner feeling on that situation because I know they're going for Iran. And what my concern is as a citizen is this another Iraq? And we all know why that happened. Is this another Syria? What I would like to know for certain, was there genuine maritime protection of oil rigs near Iranian waters? Is this a provocation? What is it that's the great threat in Iran? Is it to do with the fact that they are Shiite Muslims? They're not Sunni. I know there's a great Sunni-Shiite divide. Is it because they have an independent bank? Is it to do with total control of oil? Is it genuinely a conflict in respect of weapons? I think they're also citing weapons of mass destruction, but I think we've heard that one before. So they're in a difficult place. Now, this has been brought up in 2011, so clearly it's been on the agenda for a long time. And she goes, and we'll be doing all our counter events. It looks like we'll have, she's saying Jim Fetzer, I don't know who that is, who's talking about 9/11. Okay, so that's a little bit of housekeeping about what they're doing in the 9/11 Truth Alliance. Be an interesting meetup, wouldn't it? So I'll move forward in her transcript and we'll get to some of the choice cards. She says liberal friends who we thought were liberal friends turned out to just be liberals. And they appear to be just as more in favour of Obama and bombing Libya and attacking Yemen and shredding the Constitution and instituting rendition here in the United States. So the liberal, what she means there is people who believe in liberty, freedom. She's saying that they, in her view, are in support of all of this activity that's undermining democracy. She says, I guess I'm employing Guantanamo tactics that Pelican Bay and other supermax prisons now in the United States, where there's a hunger strike, which you also wouldn't know about unless you, kept your ear extremely close to the ground. She's talking about Pelican Bay is the US version of Guantanamo Bay, she's saying. So what she's saying is that there's one happening there in Pelican Bay. So that's something that's important. Rendition. This is holding people. I have a concern around that as well because I just have an inner feeling around it. So it's not even just a few hundred miles from here, and they're torturing people right now, right there. See, that to me is really scary. So anyway, it's a dark time, but I'm really happy that we're still able to practice our free speech rights. I should find out what her situation is today, because this is 2011, and she's certainly bringing it out, isn't she? So this is Susan Lindauer, who has had her own story to tell of being in the fold of the national security state and then kind of being kicked into the hole for not going along with it. She didn't know. Anyway, let's continue on. I'm going to go just scan down a little bit. She says, I've waited 10 years to tell this story. I remember after 9/11 when my CIA handler, Richard Fuis, F-U-I-S-Z, told me that there really wasn't going to be much of a 9/11 investigation. And, quote, we are going to try to keep the people calm. That's what he said. In quotes, we're going to keep them calm. And I said, What do you mean? He said, well, we don't really need them to know everything that we're doing before 9/11. That's quoted. And she said, well, why? What do you think's going to happen when they find out that you didn't tell them the truth? Why don't you just tell them the truth right now? And he said, well, that's not really what they want to do. And so I had different ideas. I will tell you straight off the bat that right after 9/11, my CIA handler received $13 million payoff from 9/11 investigation. That was supposed to be money used to secure Iraq's cooperation. Okay, so we're talking bribery there. And I ended up getting indicted on the Patriot Act. I was the second non-Arab American ever indicted on the Patriot Act after Jose Padilla. And my crime was in opposing terrorism. I want to repeat that. She's saying her crime was in opposing terrorism. That runs counter to the narrative, doesn't it? And going to Congress. And I had spoken to the staff of Senator John McCain and Senator Trent Lott, and I pounded them. I called their chiefs of staff, their legislative directors, and their foreign policy people. And I said, I'm an asset who covered Iraq and Libya at the United Nations, and I have a story to tell. And you need to hear what I have to say. That's quoted. And within 30 days, I was not making this up, thanks to the Patriot Act. All of my phone calls to these officers are taped by the FBI. So I can actually prove that they occurred, and I have the dates. I have the actual phone conversations on tape, and within 30 days of the conversations, I woke up to hear the FBI pounding on my door. And I get out of bed and I look out the window, and there are men in flak jackets on my porch. Cup of tea. And I open the door and they come into my house, and the FBI agent is shaking. So he's hiding himself. He knows that it's wrong. That's why he's shaking. She's a woman. He's not feeling physically under attack. He knows what he's doing is wrong. And he said, you are Susan Lindauer. You are hereby notified that you are under arrest on the Patriot Act. So they're using the Patriot Act to arrest people. There is no charge. That's why they use the Patriot Act. Okay, so this is rendition. I'm just sitting with this because I haven't... It's funny, when you read it out loud, you can hear it better than silently reading it. So if the United States is in a national state of emergency, then the Constitution is suspended. And if a Patriot Act is published or passed, then that's the law, common law. And she said, what? And he said, you have the right to remain silent. Yeah. And anything you say, etc., etc. He read me my Miranda rights. We don't have that in Australia. We have no rights, aren't we lucky? And I was just like, what are you talking about? I'm making coffee, she says. I'm not a bank robber. I'm not a drug dealer. I'm not a murderer. I haven't broken any laws that I can think of. And I have no idea what you say that I've done. He says, well, your attorney will explain it to you later on. So she has no idea of any charge. I think the police might want to be listening deeply to this transcript. I'll also attach it to this video. And I'm also talking to the Australian police. My hope is that you're truly doing your job. If I'm wrong, then maybe there'll be a knock on the door if I'm living in a house, or you'll knock on my tent. Because this is not about, in accordance with this whistleblower, this is nothing to do with laws. It's nothing to do with criminal behaviour. It's to do with speaking the truth. And that's why I'm saying that, because I'm a truth speaker myself. So that puts me at risk. She said then that became a 5-year indictment 5-year nightmare on the Patriot Act. I was never taken to trial. In 5 years, I was allowed one morning of testimony with 2 witnesses. One morning. She didn't go before a judge. This is habeas corpus. This is a fundamental in the judicial system, as any judge will tell you. Everyone has the right to be heard before a judge when they've been accused of any crime. This is how we, technically prevent innocent people from going to jail or persecution, witch hunts. Could be revenge, payback. So the judicial system, in a sense, was a way of elevating our society to action fairness. And then this gives faith to people in the system itself. She said in 5 years, that's right, she was allowed one morning of testimony with 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses were a former chief of staff for the congressional member of Congress, and my old friend Park Godfrey, who verified the 9/11 warnings that I'm going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to let you guys ask a lot of questions. And I know you're going to have a lot of questions. She says, I will tell you up front that I believe there was both the hijackings, and that does not mean that I'm right and you're wrong. I believe there were both hijackings and a controlled demolition scenario. And of course, for those who have explored 9/11 stuff, they'll recognise that people have come out, demolition experts, and said that it was a controlled implosion. So what does that suggest? That it's a setup. She says she believes that the whole thing fits together when you look at both those scenarios. She said, you may disagree, and that's okay if you disagree with me, but when you hear what I have to say, you'll understand why I've reached this conclusion. So I believe both of them happened, okay? And it's also very important for you to know that as a 10-year anniversary of 9/11 comes up, I mean, no offence, but you guys have no idea what actually happened. The lies are so much bigger than what you know, and it's much deeper. And it's so much more tragic once you have the truth. So on that note, let me just take you to, I'm going to move you a little bit ahead to remember when George Bush, and they were counting the votes in Florida. I'm going to take you back to November of 2000. So we're going to go back in time. They had not yet declared that George Bush had won the election. I was having meetings with the full knowledge and permission of the CIA with Iraq's ambassador to the United Nations on resuming the weapons inspections. It's also very important for you to understand that this story with 9/11 also ties in deeply to what happened with Iraq. And contrary to everything you were told, the Iraqis were not resistant to weapons inspections. And as I've said in my other videos, I heard that statement made by Scott Ritter, the former weapons inspector, who said that they were cooperative. This was very important information. The only area they were tense was in protection of Saddam Hussein, he said. They had a comprehensive agenda. The CIA had already a comprehensive agenda for resolving the entire conflict without war at all. Well, congratulations to the CIA, I'd just like to say that. They had a comprehensive agenda for resolving the entire conflict without war. I'm very, very pleased as a peacemaker to hear that, because it's not often I hear the CIA mentioned in the peacemaking narrative like this. So that's good to know. And it involved weapons inspections cooperation with anti-terrorism and major financial contracts for US corporations. The last bit concerns me, financial contracts for US corporations and oil. And this would be developed over a period of time. Okay, see now that's looking different to me now. When I see oil in there and contractors, it looks like a profit situation, which is why they didn't want war. So it's not really about peace. It's about not having a war. Okay. But we already had, by November of 2000, we already had an agreement with the Iraqi government. We had a framework agreement that was at that point, it was undefined or not well defined. And we had to make it defined. But they had already consented to all of these things. They wanted peace with us. This is the Iraqis. Do they actually know what peace means? People talk peace, but they don't know what it means. They want peace with us. They don't want war, is what that's really saying. And so by February 2001, the Iraqis had agreed to offer to invite the FBI to send a task force into Baghdad with authorization to conduct terrorism investigations and to make arrests of terror suspects. This is very important for you to understand. So this is like the background of what you have to know. Okay, in April of 2001, I was summoned. Oh, this is really happening. The Comprehensive Peace Framework, those discussions are already underway, and I'm at this point the chief asset covering the Iraq Embassy and the Libya House. I do both of them, and Yemen and Syria and Egypt and Malaysia. But Iraq and Libya are my primary countries. And so I'm a back channel, which means that the US government gives me messages to give the Iraqis, and then the Iraqis give me messages to give Washington. So I know everything. Every single conversation is going through me. That's why this is a good testimonial, because everything's going through her. She's a witness. That's why they wanted to shut her down so strongly. And I can tell you that in April of 2001, I was summoned to my CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fuils, and he said he had a message for me to deliver to New York at the earliest possible convenience. And the message was this: we are looking for information on a conspiracy to hijack airplanes. We expect the target to be the World Trade Center. We think they're going to fly the aeroplanes into the World Trade Center, and we want the Iraqis to provide any, it's called actionable intelligence. So this is really quite a central point to the entire testimonial, because it's showing prior knowledge of a crime. She then says actionable intelligence is a name, an airport hub, a flight number, something they're going to help us identify who they are, where they're meeting, what their nationalities are, anything like this. And he says, he gives me a message and he says, we want this information. And we want you to tell the Iraqis that if they fail to give us this information, listen very carefully, and if it is later determined that they knew the information and they did not give it to us, then the United States is prepared to go to war with Iraq. Now, there's a subtle threat in there. They're basically saying you have to give us information. The reason they want that is so they can link them to the crime. That was the narrative that, as you may recall, after the towers came down and the attack happened, they went for Iraq. And everyone's going, why are they going for Iraq? They're Saudi Arabians, surely, you'd go for them, or Afghanistan, or they did actually hit Afghanistan in a counterattack. Same amount of people died, I believe. But that's not in the media. I haven't searched for it, but I remember it happening because I was listening to it at the time. So that information's removed. So if they fail to give us information and it's later determined that they knew, so that could mean that they might plant the information. And then they can say, well, they knew, we've got evidence. Then that gives them the green light to go to war. So if war is the objective, they're looking for ways to make the other party responsible. And what's interesting about this whole scenario is the Saudis involved in it. Close connections to the Bush administration is well known now. Saudis invest something like 10% in the US financial markets, stock exchange, stocks. So if they pull that money, the country collapses. So there's also other geopolitical pressures that can be used as leverage by other nation states to ensure a nation does their bidding. So there's a price if you don't do as we ask. So this is really the world of what they call tooth and claw. So this is a sort of a Hobbesian worldview that's being described here, where it's dog eat dog. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. If you don't do what I want, there'll be a consequence. So we're talking bullying. And this is not a new thing. This has been the modus operandi of power since this paradigm began, which began around when we became addicted to money, when we became addicted to materialism. That would be the beginning of this. She then goes on to say, I went up to New York and we were in the middle of these great negotiations. From February of 2001, we had an invitation for the FBI to come to Baghdad. So I go up to New York and I'm very pleasant, I'm very polite. There's no reason to be nasty with these people. They want peace. I say, hey, could you please send a message to Baghdad? We'd like this information if you come across anything. Saddam had been one of our best sources on terrorism throughout the 1990s, so these were old allies. Iraq hated terrorism because they believed that they hated Islamic jihadists. He hated, she says, he did. Whether you like Saddam or not, whether you hate Saddam or not, he hated Islamic conservatives. He was convinced that they would take advantage of the crumbling of authority in Baghdad under the sanctions, and they would then try to overturn his government. And the poverty of the people, and this is the strategy for sanctions I've talked about in another video. The poverty of the people from the sanctions would fuel this problem. So there's your fuel. Would help overturn this government. So they try and put pressure on the people, cause them a lot of pain, and then they blame the government. So this is like your third-party manipulator seeking to cause conflict and trouble in order to get what it wants. It's another objective. But what you'll find as you start to go into this sort of intelligence material is it's all smoke and mirror. So you can't believe things on the surface. So when you see things on television, you have to look at it with a more critical focus. Because the thing with technology is that events can be orchestrated with holographic. Some people have alleged that the Twin Tower scenario was a holographic event. They have the technology to be able to create a hologram. You could have a spaceship sitting over the top. It could be a hologram, you don't know. Media could all be reporting, oh my God, this is happening. This shock and awe to the world then enables a situation where others can take over because people are frightened, they want protection, they give away their power. So you've got to understand, if you want peace in the world, you've got to understand the strategies of those who don't want it. And so they set up scenarios that will always create fear and shock. Or they might use people who seem really nice and really lovely, and you think, oh, I can trust that. And then it turns out that that person wasn't quite what they seemed. So you have to be very discerning. Always look at the outcomes, who gets served by this. And as they often say, follow the money. There's a truism in journalism. So in this case, she's saying that Saddam Hussein's absolutely hating terrorism, doesn't like Islamic extremists, conservatives, concerned about being overthrown, concerned about the sanctions that are applied by the United States in this conflict that's been created, that it pauperizes a people and an uprising occurs. So she says, when I go to New York in April of 2001, I'm very friendly and I say, hey, hi, look, could you send this message to Baghdad? Let them know we're looking for this, blah, blah. And the message from the Iraqis in April of 2001 is, hey, send the FBI. We've already invited you to send the FBI. Come on, tell them, just bring them on. See, they were doing that to just be as cooperative as possible and get them there to investigate themselves, because they knew that they would have known that there was an attack pending. So she goes back to Washington and I get a phone call from Richard and he says, come down to my office. I want to hear what they said. I go down and I say, oh, I was real polite. Yeah. I gave them the message. Sure. He said, I didn't tell you to be nice. I told you to tell those. This is going to be on television, right? She says. Okay, I'll soft pedal, she says. He was like, you stupid goddamn blankety blank. I told you to tell those SOBMFers, goddamn, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. He's screaming and circling me around his conference desk. That's really interesting, isn't it? Screaming. Why screaming? Because he doesn't like what he's hearing. I'll never forget it. She said, circling his conference desk, ranting and raving, waving his arms around. He didn't do that very often. He does not have that kind of personality. He's a very calm man. He feels that if you're really angry at somebody, then the more calm you are, the more dangerous you are. Interesting psychology. That's CIA. He's old school CIA. Okay, so he's screaming now and he's like, you go back to New York and you deliver the message exactly that way. I told you to deliver the message. And I said, well, Richard, I don't want them to think I'm threatening them because I believe in negotiations and conflict resolution. I do too. Whoever's been following me, absolutely. So it's not unknown in the CIA to resolve conflict. It's good to hear. He says, no, I don't want them to think that you are threatening them. And he said, I don't want them to think I'm threatening them. I want you to tell them this threat of war originates at the highest level of government, above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State. It would be three men, President George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Ronald McDonald. Sorry, Ronnie. Just joking, man. And no one else. Those are the three people who are threatening war. The three blind horsemen. I think it's typically four, but we're going to go with the three. So George Bush, the president, Vice President Dick Cheney, who was the former CEO of Halliburton. We've got Donald Rumsfeld. And I want to be really clear about the message that I was ordered to give them. We demand that you turn over any fragment of intelligence outlining a conspiracy involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. If you withhold this information, if we discover that you have withheld this information and the attack occurs, then we will bomb you back to the Stone Age. So is that how we spread democracy in the world? Is that how we lead? Something to consider. This is what weaponry does. They have the power to use those weapons to threaten people. So she is being instructed to strongly word this so that they get frightened. This is intimidation. It's a bullying technique. They get frightened and then they just give them anything. And then they will use that information. It was like what she has said in some stuff I've just finished reading in the court situation of saying very little. I mean, they have ample stuff with me because I speak about everything. But nonetheless, truth can be manipulated, can't it? If you're a spin doctor and you're very good at the words that are coming to me is perception management, because this is the skill. If you're very good at perception management, then you're able to twist anything into something and you just slant it. You bring up or manufacture an issue that makes that person look like they're dishonest, or they have a seedy background, or they made a mistake once. And the idea is to remove their credibility. So that's why they're wanting evidence on some level. He then goes on to say, you'll be bombed harder than you have ever been bombed before. I mean, how horrific is that? And it's not the Iraqi seniority in this case that is going to be suffering here. It's going to be the people, because they've even got forewarning, so they can go into bomb shelters, but the people don't. It says here, you will be destroyed. You've never been hit the way we're going to hit you now. Okay, so I went up and I delivered that message. This is May of 2001. In June and July, practically every single week, my CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fiues, and I talked about 9/11. So we're talking September 11, right? This is June and July. They've had plenty of notice. August, September, 2 months, at least 2 months, well, 3 months before, June, July, August, September 11. So 3.5 months. And it was very clear that the intelligence community was being prepped for two things. One, to expect airplane hijackings. Now I have to be honest with you, because I know a lot of you are interested in the controlled demolition. They prepped us to expect the airplane hijackings. They told us about it, like my CIA handler demanded that Iraq had to give us this. And they insisted that it happened, that if it happened, there would be dire consequences. Now what you're going to see in my book, and we have more copies of my book outside, and we've got more here too. There was something else going on that summer that was very beautiful. This peace framework. Oh, see, I just go, oh, I love those words. Peace framework that we had been working on was magnificent. Oh, I'd love to see the peace framework, but I don't know about the contractors. I mean, that again is profiting. And what right do US contractors have to take market share in Iraq? Shouldn't that be the Iraqis that should be building, their society? Anyway, can't really comment on it, don't really know. It was turning out just glorious for a peace dividend. The Iraqis were now offering the weapons inspections, which of course the United States had very rigorous standards for the weapons inspections. Iraq was offering cooperation with anti-terrorism to allow the FBI to go in, and Iraq started to offer a lot more. A lot more came on the table by the summer, by June, July of 2001. Iraq was offering the United States preferential contracts. So this is really trying to give them sweetness to back off, because they're scared. They know they are into materialism, so they're trying to give them money. So in a way, bribing them back and saying, pay. It's actually protection money is what that is. Protection, definitely. It's very akin to a gang, isn't it? Protectionism. Well, corruption, it's reflecting from what she's describing. Now, think about the economy today. Preferential contracts for the United States, corporations on telecommunications, healthcare, hospital equipment, pharmaceuticals and transportation. Iraq offered to buy 1 million American manufactured automobiles every year for 10 years. Think of what that would have done to the economy. Think about non-dual use factory production. Because the CIA was like, if we are going to give up these darn sanctions, we're going to take a pound of flesh with it. See, this is not a peace narrative. It's like, it's all about the money, and you can see it in the way she's describing it. And even she also leans towards, oh, well, we get business out of it, that's good. So they would accept the bribes. And this is where values comes in. It's like, when you are raised with values, and George Bush, for example, his dad, he wasn't raised in that sort of environment of values, was he? So do you blame the son? Do you blame the father? Who was his father? Prescott Bush. What was his activities? How did he raise George H.W. Bush? Herbert Walker, isn't it? What's been passed down from father to son? So they are following in the footsteps of the one before. So it's breaking not only the cycle of this violence, but it's breaking the cycle of these types of thought patterns that are, very much in the realm of psychopathic thoughts, where they're not caring and feeling for the other, for those that are being impacted by these strategies that are being created at high levels. So she goes on to say, the CIA was doing what it's supposed to do, whether you like it or not. They were taking care of what is in the best interest of the United States government, with the best interest of the United States economy. So we've got two entities there, government and economy. What about the people? And that's something for Susan to sit with, because she's believing that's what they're supposed to do, is support their government and economy. Is that true? We the people. Government is for the people, by the people, for the people. Now, people would argue, well, an economy that's well functioning, growth is obviously going to have material benefits for the public. There is truth in that. The question is the balance. And do you attain that material well-being by putting the gun to the head of someone else? Do you bully others in the world in order to get what you want? Is that the sort of basis on which you wish to cite that you have a democracy? Is that success? Or is that a form of thuggery? And these are the really deep questions that people have to ask. And that's why these times are here right now, is because people are going to start to question more deeply the world in which they live. And values do matter. They were not going to let Iraq punish the United States. And I hated the sanctions. I was doing this because I hated the sanctions. I was doing it because they had destroyed education. They wiped out literacy in a single generation. They destroyed the hospitals and the healthcare system. Iraq performed the second heart transplant in the world, and we wiped them out. Okay, 11,000 people died every month. Might want to sit with that. We talk about one murder and we say this is terrible. We can blow it up in the media. This is 11,000 a month. What is the cost of an Iraqi citizen? Is it the same? Are those 11,000 people equal to 11,000 Americans? 11,000 Somalis, 11,000 Australians, 11,000 New Zealanders, 11,000 Congolese. What does that mean in truth? When you sit with those people and they're your friends, would you say because they're of another nationality that has a poorer economy that they're worth less than you? You wouldn't, because they're your friend. The value is in the friendship, right? What if you were able to look at other members of our world family without the story of needing to have friendship in order to value them? What if they're a gift to the world just as you are? What if they've come from the same source as you have? We didn't create ourselves, right? You could say, well, my parents did. Yeah, but beyond that, who created the human body? This is where you need to focus. It's like get perspective. And then you see the synchronicities in life, things turning up. What happened to Susan here? You know, she's gone through this journey. There's no mistake in any of this, that she's been witness to this. Now, I'm just going to go to the people that have died again. 11,000 died every month, every 4 weeks. By the end of 1996, and this is, I want you to really hear this, 500,000 children had died in sanctions. Now, that's a direct result of US policy. I think it was Madeleine Albright at the time who said, I think it's a price worth paying. 500,000 children, unless they're your own. How many died in the World Trade Center? Was it 5,000, 6,000 people? Became memorialized, was talked about, it was justified, endless war on terror, where a lot more died in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and so on. So those lives were seen as worth more than 500,000 children. And that's by economic sanctions, to punish a regime, to force it to comply. This is compliance. So I don't know why I get surprised here in Australia with the compliance. It came as a shock because, I just thought we're in a democracy. It woke me up, actually. It was good, but it's been around a long time. And I didn't know. And I too am waking up. That's why I'm doing videos, because I'm aware now. And because of the apathy within not only the US society, here as well, and UK and many other countries, people are not speaking up. Because of our apathy, and I'll say our, because it could happen to us as easily as it did the US people, because we just go, oh, okay, let's watch the news, oh, well, 500,000 died. Because we're not reflecting values either, they know, and they know they can get away with it. So we are complicit in a crime here. All of us who say nothing, we're all complicit, including Australia, because we sent our troops. We're in the bloody coalition of the willing. Even though there was protests here in Australia, there was 250,000 here in Melbourne and similar number in Sydney. So people were against the war in Iraq, there's not a doubt about it. However, and I guess what people were experiencing was their impotence in being able to be heard by their own government. And Scott Ritter, when he gave his talk in the University of Melbourne, he was sort of talking about us hawking up the US flag because we were following into a war that he saw as an illegitimate war of aggression. I've called it illegal in a few videos. It was illegal anyway, but it's illegitimate. War of aggression is the language he used. Our intelligence community, certainly Andrew Wilkie, who's an MP in Tasmania now, he spoke up. I was part of a group of journalists that interviewed him. So I'm just saying that our silence, and for the most part, the majority are silent. They say, oh, there's nothing we can do. That's a really popular one. It's untrue. The minute you all speak up, but in the times we're in now, you're going to have to do it in ways that's more cautionary because, people are being actively suppressed, and that's the first time in Australian history we're witnessing a real regime change here. So just bear it in mind. So 500,000 children died. I also want to expand on that to say, had they lived, imagine the futures that they would have had, partners they would have met, the experiences all those 500,000 people would have had a decision not been made in Washington to apply sanctions to a regime because they want name change. So the people you select for powerful positions, they have to be absolutely in integrity. As Susan indicated in the beginning, that they should be completely removed from power if they are seen in any way or acting out in any way or implicated in any way in any crimes. When we're talking 500,000 people, these are major, major crimes. These are like war crimes. Yet people don't seem to respond appropriately because they're so detached. And there is an agenda in maintaining powerlessness in the public so that they do not interfere with those in power actioning agendas. They don't want it. She said that even in respect of that number, she says they only counted 5-year-olds and younger. They didn't even count the 6-year-olds because the United Nations was holding back the numbers. Okay, the UN, why was the UN holding back the numbers? More corruption. And after that report in December of 1996, they stopped counting. Now this is 1996, before 2001. We're talking 5 years before there has been abuse of a whole nation. Can you imagine how those families felt when their children died of starvation? I don't know if you can imagine the grief if it was your child that died. So you have to go there. It's very easy to read numbers on a page, but imagine you're staring into the eyes of the child that's dying. You're watching its last breath. Would you consider it differently than looking at numbers on a page? And this is what technology does. It distances us. So you can lob a missile or you can put a sanction on, and that's just an administrative in one case, and the other it's a projection of power through militarism. But can you actually look the mother in the eyes and tell her that it was good that the child died? I don't think so. So we hide behind the technology because we are so focused on our own agendas and our own interests, because we're separate. We don't see the other as ourselves. This is why this old paradigm is imploding. What's been put out into the world is returning. And all the king's horses and all the king's men cannot put Humpty together again. You're sitting on that wall. It's actually a maze, dividing yourself off from everyone. And there's another country who's done exactly the same thing in their leadership. They have isolated themselves, gone their own way. And it's a zero-sum strategy, because we're living in a dynamic here that's a universal type of dynamic. What you put out comes back. And you can surveil till the cows come home. You can put cameras in every room. You can do what you're doing with the smart meters and the bloody NBN, all that. You can do all that. But you cannot defy natural law. You can't. Because you're not evolved enough to understand the importance of cause and effect. You still think you can dominate the spectrum. And that's the weakness of our civilization. That is the very thing that collapses it all, inclusive of those at the very top. They fall down with it too. And no matter where you go, and I've said this in videos before and I'm going to reinforce it, even off planet, karma follows. It's called karma, cause and effect. Something goes wrong where you go to next. You can have underground tunnels. You can have underground cities. You can have pumped billions into ensuring your own survival. But what you put out comes back is the universal law beyond human control. So when I see deaths like this, we're talking 1 million children who have died in Iraq, who committed no crime, who know nothing about the geopolitics in respect of their leadership in the United States. She says they were babies. They weren't even alive when the first Gulf War happened. I'm feeling strong emotion coming up, actually. She said it's genocide. This is a mass genocide. This is a war crime that has not been dealt with quickly enough. Not been dealt with at all at this point. I feel to bring in Major Douglas Rokke, who was my first interviewee when I was on radio. And he talked about the children, and that was what motivated him to become a whistleblower. He was in the Pentagon. He was head of the Depleted Uranium Project. He had a huge expertise. And he was horrified at the depleted uranium that was in the nose cones of missiles. That was munitions exploded in Iraq. Apparently it was very good for piercing tanks. It was heat, very hot, and pierced them. Very effective as a munition. But when we're talking about civil society, just like here or like in the US, look around your neighbourhood, whoever's watching me now, I want you to look outside the window. Same. They spread depleted uranium, thousands of tons of it. And what his cry for help is that his own people, 10,000 US soldiers, were being exposed to the radiation emitted from the uranium. This does link to electromagnetic smog. I'm just feeling that now as I'm speaking it. The point being is the emotional disconnect from those who are exposed. This is their own government. That's why he came out. He also spoke, not only was it 10,000 people, but it was hundreds of thousands in Iraq. So the people of Iraq were exposed. The people of Afghanistan were exposed. That's why cancer. I know an Afghan who got cancer. And this is a responsibility for the world community, and it's clearly an indicator that the UN has not had the ability to retain some form of independence. That needs to be a democratic institution, not divided by a General Assembly and a Security Council, which is not creating more security. It's actually creating greater insecurity because it's about maintaining power. Power and control is the core issue here, which is driving these decisions. And economics becomes the rationale, breaking into new markets, but not doing it in a fair way where you actually win contracts on the basis of merit. We're talking about cheating. We're talking about bullying in order to get what you want because you're terrified of losing pole position. I believe that's the underlying driver for this, the belief in empire. It's not unlike the UK when it was calling itself Great Britain. And when I was over there, I did see GB on the plates and I smiled. They couldn't quite let go of Great Britain because people attach to the material things believing that is their greatness. It's not. You got Trump saying, make America great again. Well, economic growth is not greatness. It's just the production that you've done for hundreds and hundreds of years, made money from it. And what was great was, hey, I can buy this and I can buy that, and you thought that was great. That's not greatness. Greatness is coming from within the human being. It was the great lectures coming out of, like, I think Abraham Lincoln, he always seems to come to me. JFK is another great one. Despite all the hoo-ha around them, myself just as a person listening to them talk, Martin Luther King, my God, he had an exceptional ability to communicate. The people are resonating with the greatness within the human, not what you have. They want to see what you got inside because that's what connects. When you do something genuinely with love, people feel it. So those who don't have the capacity for greatness will cleave onto or augment themselves into industry. They will try and find the greatness of who they are to leave a legacy, to be admired, because they're wanting love. They'll deny that, but it's true. They're wanting appreciation, approval, all these things to feel good about themselves. They will rationalize their decisions on the basis of it. No choice has to be done. I heard Scott Ritter say that. War's terrible, war's horrible, it's disgusting, but it's necessary. It's tragically necessary, he said. Well, I would say, is that true? Byron Katie would as well. Is it true that you need to murder other people in order to keep the world at peace? Well, is that peaceful, that action in the first place? I don't think so. Anyway, that's something to consider. I'll read on a little bit more, but we're over the hour mark, and I try not to go over an hour. For me, an hour is easy. Oh, God, talk underwater. Sorry. So she says it's a genocide. She goes on to say that CIA did not have my motivation. It's a shame. They were out to make sure that the United States was not going to be punished for what they had done. So that means they aren't going to have accountability. So the rest of us, if we commit a crime or if we do something they don't like, we have to be accountable for our actions. But these guys, the CIA inclusive of that, she's stating, are not going to be punished for what they've done, which is killing 1 million children. So that little girl, Greta, that was talking, the Swedish girl, I'm just bringing it into the contemporary moment, crying out that she's outraged that the adults are not listening to the children. How dare you, she's saying. How can you do this to us? Why aren't you doing anything? We're forced to speak up. She's quite right. She sees we're facing extinction, she says. This is about extinction. And she said the words, we will never forgive you. This is the children. Now, this is one child. We're talking about a regime here who's got no issue with 1 million. My own country was very much involved in this. And, you know, with great love and respect, I'd say to them, what you put out comes back, same universal law. For those of you of faith within this area, I'm going to go still for a moment, but I have a message for you as well, because I have a very deep love of this higher power. And I also recognize the one that you follow as well, as I am familiar. So I want to go still because I need to talk with you as well. Complicitness comes straight up. And I'm just going to keep going in because I'm going to go calm a bit because I'm upset about 1 million children and this little girl, Greta, who's also being attacked for wanting to save her own friggin' life. This is insanity that fights that. So I'm going to go still and allow myself to feel the peace. I feel to say that I'm not praying. I want to explain to you what I'm doing, okay? I'm going still because I'm not doing it. I have absolutely no thought going through my mind when I close my eyes. I'm not interfering with the wisdom that's within, that we all have equal, we're all equally wise. I'm just able to tap in because I have an intention for it. If you have an intention for power, you have an intention for spin, you have an intention for short-term asset gain, you're not going to be doing this. So I'm going to do it for us. I'll be honest, what I see is John Howard straight away. Okay, I'm just going to go still. Friendship, George Bush, Bush family. Murdoch, Isn't it funny? Go still, they come straight up. Okay. Military links. Oh, I saw submarine. I don't know why. Submarine. Collins class, probably. That's my humour. Yeah, well, this is a little bit surprising. I feel great love for Scott Morrison. I'm going to allow the vibration to come through. I feel I want to cry. Yeah, I do. It's to do with his charismatic worship. So freedom of religion, yes. I'm just saying what is coming into my feeling. Wants to know God, wants to love God. I understand that. Yeah, the feeling is gentleness towards him in the sense of he has to become very still about where he is right now. He does have to face what's happened. Don't worry about the promised land. Be in the now, right now. Have confidence in Australian people. Work for them. I just want to go still because I don't want it to be my words. I want it to be from the still point within, which is I'm accessing peace. This inner stillness that I'm going into is coming on the back of 1 million children that died in Iraq. So children is the message. It is about Greta. It is about hearing the children. They absolutely have to speak up. Now, I can help you as a peacemaker. I've got a Speak Up award, which is to advance real sustainability and real peace in our world. You are welcome to employ me since I'm homeless right now. Can do with the money. No, I'm just playing there. But what I'm saying is that we need to give them real hope. It is the little children that lead us to peace. And what that really is saying is the innocence. You've got to hear the innocence. There's no agenda in these statements. It's coming directly from the heart. And they're very frightened when they look at you adults because you're very violent. In our culture, and I've learned this over my life experience, we're very detached from each other. We talk family and people go into community and try to feel that sense of community, but the truth is we're really filled with negativity and low self-esteem. We have sought to bring materialism to us in order to feel better about who we are. Many people are operating in unconscious ways. They're not aware, self-aware, that they are augmenting their life with all these things in order to feel good and to be reflective to the world that they somehow are reflecting success. And the same applies with the US as well as a culture, because we're similar cultures. So love is not just a statement of love is the answer. You have to learn how to access the true love and then look out at the world. My real hope work was looking through values. So responsibility means the ability to respond. You can do something. It's in your hands. This is a message definitely to you. Empathy is to stand in the shoes of the other, stand in the shoes of the people. The Iranians. You are an Iranian civilian. You know what's happened in previous encounters. How would you feel if it was your family that were there? Awareness means not just getting all the facts and briefings. It's actually to open to a higher awareness. That awareness is when I go still, I'm opening to an awareness. And this is really looking into the implications of one's own actions. Really, where is that going to go if you go that path? Is it really serving your children? And you have to put your children as the objective here because they are the people. Love means you look upon situation through the eyes of love. And I know for those who are seeking something higher, you have to learn to love the thing you don't like. There have been wise ones who have been here who have loved everyone. That is what that means. Love is the answer. You have to lead with that. Violence is not love. Violence is a call for help. Violence is used in order to maintain a living standard of living, a way of life that people feel they can't do without. That's an unquestioned thought. What people aren't understanding is that life is dynamic and more comes. It's not there is really no loss unless you attach to it emotionally. If you don't attach to anything, you'll have no loss. Life is very, very abundant in reality. So honesty is the next thing. You can't be spinning stuff. Honesty, speak the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. You have to be in alignment with that. And that can be hard sometimes, particularly in political circles where people are not doing that. Oneness means we're one world, one breath, one family. How do we, as a nation, become that mediator between warring parties, I'm feeling to say? There is an opportunity here to be friends with both, because the rock and a hard place was what I've said before, and I'm not wrong. But you can't be playing one off the other, and you can't be pretending. You've got to be truly a peacemaker. You have to understand deeply what the fear is on both sides and allow that love to guide you. And it comes from love, not thought, okay? You have to be open to that. So honesty, oneness, peace. Peace is the yin and the yang, the balance. You have to find balance in your own life. So that means within you, I'm actually even thinking to health, rest, balance on lots of levels. Because when you're balanced within and you're like the scales of justice, you're balancing one side with the other. What if this? What if that? Is that going to balance? Is that fair? Fairness is a good way of getting balance. You can't be leaning one way too much and the other way too much. You have to actually be in the center, and it's not an easy place to be. Look at Gandhi. He was a peacemaker. He was balanced. Sometimes you had to speak the truth, the whole truth, but it's the pathway, believe me. It is definitely the pathway. And it takes a lot of courage to do it. So honesty, oneness, peace, enjoyment. Have some fun. I'm sure you are as well. Life is about laughter, and enjoy the journey. It's a journey. We continue on. And the last one is service. People would say, who do you serve? And pragmatically, you might have your own answers for that you think are absolutely necessary, like Scott Ritter, when he said that war was tragically necessary. I would differ with that. I do not think it's tragically necessary at all. As a female, I've never had to hurt anyone to get what I want. And what happened with me is that I just learned to live with what I have. You know, I mean, I live on $35 a week, and I'm fine, you know. Wasn't a fair situation that created that, but in a sense of my learning to align with what I consider to be the true abundance, I live a very amazing life in a lot of ways. I don't have a home and all the material things, but what I'm learning is that you don't actually need them. Yes, we want food, but the food comes, and if you have trust, not faith, I'm going to move it to trust now, because I actually don't have faith. I know. I have definite experience with this, and I'm not saying I can walk on water. No, I'm sure I'd sink. I'm just saying that I know, in the sense of the love. I know it. It's constantly, whenever I go still, I feel it. So this is really, funnily enough, a message to you. Isn't that funny? I didn't expect that. And that's the beauty of allowing oneself to just speak the truth in authenticity into a video like this, is that I'm not controlling the message. This is not I'm thinking performance management, but that's not the word. What do they call it? Managing perceptions. This is not perceptions management. I don't have a PR company to spin this. That's why I do what I do. So service, going back to that again, is to serve the highest love first. And all things will be unto you. I'm speaking from that narrative, I believe. It's kind of like blessings. But you have to align with real hopes in your, because a delicate situation. It is delicate. So I could read more of Susan's work here, but you get the message. I'm going to attach this and highly recommend you read it, because what we don't want is to lend our energy to criminality and call it peace when it's not. I say that from when I've had moments when I've had no money and I've been offered work that was not ethical. In one case, it was working for an RSL that wanted to increase gambling. And I had $20 in my bank account, and I said no. My partner was surprised at the time, thinking, well, just take the money. On a greater scale, we can say at an economic level, just take the money. This is the money lenders. You have to be aware of this. Just take the money, worry about it later, the next generation will pay. No. You have to sit very still on that. What is the implication of that? What does the debt do? How does that impact on the people? If everything becomes privatised, they lose a say over systems that have been set up with taxation to ensure the health and safety of the people. I'm going to just say what is coming to me, and I'm not religious, as people know, but I'm tuned in. So the fishes and the loaves came to me just then. We can make abundance. The abundance is there. We don't need to become indebted. Now, someone will say, oh, what do you mean the loaves and the fishes? Come on. As I said, I'm not religious, but I'm just saying what inspiration comes to me. And what it really is about is a law of attraction. See, we live in a deficit mentality in any case. We think there's not enough. The levers get pulled, so there's shortages, contrived shortages, when we live in an abundant system in truth. The natural world is abundant. If we live in balance with that abundance, because we've got peace within ourselves, there's plenty. When you're in trust, you have enough. Now, if you don't put an expectation on what you think you need, things just turn up. And that's what has happened to me being 2 years homeless. Things have come to me, most definitely. So I'm also having an experiment. But this is an experiment in trust. It's an experiment in walking the talk. If you say you're into love, live it. It's about overcoming fear, which is what is driving our world into this corner. It really is about peace with yourself and peace with others. So I think this message with the 9/11 stuff, from what even I've just read briefly, we're dealing here with very ambitious people who just want to continue with the party, keep it going, because they're frightened of losing everything. And I remember when Wall Street crashed, some years ago, people threw themselves out of windows because they really believed that those financial assets were their wealth. In actual fact, they saw themselves as nothing without the money. And then that gets projected onto people who don't have money too. But none of it's true. It's just that they've been experiencing conditional love from other people, where if you don't have this, you don't wear the right shirt, you don't have the nice house, you don't have the nice wife or husband, if you don't present to the world in a way that says success, we're going to look at you and you're not even going to get in the front door. That's called conditional love. In other words, you have to turn up the way we think, otherwise you're rejected. And what I'm saying is unconditional love. That's what I mean by love is the answer. It means accept all people as they are, as you find them. Understand that there is more to this world than we know. Yes, there are many perspectives. You might have certain belief systems that you think are absolutely unshakable, but I'm just saying be aware that there is more than you know. And when you open your mind in that way, it means you know you don't know, and that opens you up to the wisdom that will guide you through that valley. What is it? Psalm 23? Treat everybody with love, and you will be amazed that you can turn it all around. Anyway, that's just my contribution. Take it or leave it, but that's what I felt to say. So I'm going to leave it there now. I'm going to have a rest. I've done well today. Thanks. Bye.